Let's take the example of understanding how the partial correlation coefficient of R subscript 13.2 is calculated. To understand how we need to calculate PCC, for example R13.2, we need to appreciate that 1 and 3 and the relationship between in this case profits and interest of employees is sought to be understood while partialing the influence of advertising. That's exactly what we mean by R13.2. Let's try to understand how we calculate the partial correlation coefficient, in short PCC, of the relationship R13.2. Now obviously we know that R stands for the correlation coefficient of 1, which is 0.6, and for 3 it is 0.65, and for 2 it is 0.7, assuming that x1 stands for profits, x2 stands for advertising, and x3 stands for interest of employees. We understand therefore that x1 stands for the correlation between 1 and 2, x1 and x2. That is the relationship between profits and advertising. Similarly, x2 stands for the relationship between profits and interest of employees, notated by R13. And the third relationship we have, correlation relationship we have here, is that of R23, which obviously means the relationship between x2 and x3. That is the relationship between advertising and interest of employees. In other words, when we say that we are trying to understand the partial correlation coefficient, we are actually trying to understand the relationship between the variables 1 and 3, while partialing 2 out. In other words, we say the relationship between profits and advertising while partialing the influence of interest of employees. In this case, of course, we are trying to understand the relationship between profits and interest of employees while partialing the influence of advertising. So what I have here in the red is partialed out. What I have here in the green is the real relationship of what we call as the PCC, the partial correlation coefficient relationship of 1, 3, while partialing the influence of 2 outside its ambit. So the relationship between profits and interest of employees is sought to be understood while we partial out the influence of the second variable, that is advertising, and that is 2. So 1 and 3, a relationship to the correlation is sought to be found out, and we partial out 2, that is the influence of advertising, from the relationship of 1 and 3. Similarly, if you are trying to understand the partial correlation coefficient of R at 1,2.3, this means that R1 stands for profits and R2 stands for advertising and R3 stands for interest of employees. So in this case, the PCC 12.3 implicates that we try to see the relationship between profits understood as 1 here and advertising understood as 2 here, while we partial out to the influence of interest of employees. Okay, and that's what we're trying to understand through the notation R subscript 1.2.3. This is the PCC of trying to understand the influence of profits and advertising while we partial out the influence of interest of employees.